from Pennies to Dollars, and welcome to my channel today. I have had a very productive morning. I have clothes on the line, I have the dishes hand washed, I'm on my third load of laundry, and I have gluten-free bread baking. I have rice in one crock pot and beef tips going in another. I feel productive when I'm home doing things like this. I know I am working for myself, I am saving money, and I'm making use of what I have. But today we are going to talk about a requested video on things that I've learned from owning a grocery store. My husband and I actually owned two grocery stores in towns of under 500 people, and we ran one of them for 18 months. The town did not utilize it. They chose to drive an additional 30-40 miles to the nearest town, and that was their choice, and we decided it was not worth our while to be working 7 days a week and paying all of those utilities and barely scraping by. The other one we owned for 7.5 years, and we sold it to someone else, and it is still going. That's kind of the background of us owning grocery stores. We're in a small town, mind you. I continued to work full-time. My husband ran the store full-time. I would go to work, I would come back, I would meet him, I would work in the evenings, I would work Saturdays, I would work Sundays. We usually both worked Sundays, and Saturday would be his day off. And we would alternate sometimes to have a day off, but many times in a small town, it took both of us. So worked 7 days a week, except for a few holidays that we took off for 7.5 years. And so these are some of the things that I learned from owning a grocery store. And I hope that you can benefit from some of the things that I learned, because going into this, I was already frugal. Going into this, I knew how to cook. But once I became an owner and working full-time, there became less time to cook, more time to have to just throw things together, more time to just have to grab something out of the refrigerator, because we would both come home so tired that we couldn't cook and it was too late to cook. And so I learned a lot during this process. And many of the things that I learned from owning the grocery store was from observing other people and then seeing myself and my own habits that I had going into this business reflected in the way that people shop. So here's the 10 things that I chose on what I learned. The first thing I learned is how much money we actually spend on things that we could be making at home that are very easy and very cheap. Things like gravy packets, taco seasoning, things like buttermilk. I became kind of the local teacher or go-to when people would come in, because it was so far to drive to the next large big box store. They would come in and say, "Do you have this?" Well, in a town of under 500 people, we couldn't have everything, and we were a 2-aisle grocery store, and we had all of the basics plus things by request, and we would special order things in. I mean, we worked our heinies off 7 days a week for this. But there were things that we couldn't buy by the case because they would spoil too quickly and they wouldn't sell. So we figured out pretty early on what we could carry, what we couldn't carry. So people would come in sometimes and ask for buttermilk once in a blue moon. We could have never sold a case of buttermilk if our lives depended on it. And so I became that go-to person on giving people shortcuts on how to cook. And I would like to think that they learned a lot from me during those 7.5 years also on how to get by without just running to the store to grab something, because we didn't always have the thing that they wanted. And so I would teach them on buttermilk to add like vinegar, lemon juice to their milk, and it would sit there and it would become buttermilk so that they could use it in their recipes. So just little things like that, because we carried vinegar, we carried lemon juice, we carried milk. They were ways for us to have them be able to get what they needed by giving them advice sometimes. And most of the time people already had vinegar and lemon juice at home, and sometimes they already had milk. So when we taught them that, they would say, "Oh, I already have that," and they would go home and then make it without having to purchase something else. So that would be my first thing, is just, knowing how to cook can save money. Knowing those little shortcuts and knowing how much we really spend for those little convenience items can really save us money. The next tip is that I saw how much we really spend on snacks and alcohol and impulse items in the grocery store. Many times people would just pick things up because they looked good or they were hungry, or just these little easy packaged things. And many times when they got to check out, they'd be like, wow, I didn't expect to buy that much. I just came in for a couple of things. And how many times has that happened to us, that you just go in for a couple of things and you come out with like 3 bags of stuff? And that was one thing that I really could see in myself then, is that was something that I needed to change. I needed to be more aware of all of those little incidental things that I would pick up with no intention of picking them up when I first went into the store. The next tip that I saw also within myself is how bringing people with you will cost you a lot more money. People that came in with their spouses, that came in with their children would end up spending sometimes $30, $40 extra dollars, because they would have them asking for this, asking for that, grabbing a 12-pack of beer, grabbing a couple of bags of chips and some dip. It would always end up costing them a lot more. And I realized, as I watched people come in and shop alone and then come in and shop with their families, and how much more they would spend if there were other people with them. They would deviate from that list. The next tip I became even more aware of than I already did before is that recipes are a suggestion. So many people would come in with their phones and they would have that recipe and they would literally be buying every single thing off of that recipe. But those recipes are on people's blogs and on people's websites, and they're trying to get you to buy certain products. And that's why they have those sites to begin with. And people would think they had to follow every single thing on that list or they couldn't make that recipe. And many of the things that became common that I saw were things that never used to be common. If you think about it, there never used to be smoked paprika, just paprika. There never used to be fire roasted tomatoes, just canned tomatoes. And as they started adding garlic tomatoes and all of the different flavors of the diced tomatoes, it makes you buy something else instead of adding those spices at home. So that was something that I became aware of as well. And the next tip as well is that dates became a suggestion. I saw how every year at Thanksgiving, the pumpkin would go out of date right before Thanksgiving, making us buy more and making the consumer buy more. Because if you followed those dates as a rule, you would be throwing out food that was perfectly good. Those manufacturer dates are a suggestion. Most of them are best by, not used by dates. And even so, you can open it up and see if the product is still good. So my husband and I, out of necessity to keep our business operating and keep our home operating, began bringing home the expired items and the items that couldn't be resold. And we lived off of those for 7.5 years. We cooked off of those, we used them, we realized how many of those things were still good and how the marketing was making people buy more and making the store owner buy more. I also learned, because of us bringing stuff home that couldn't be resold, how many fruits and vegetables and all of these things could be either whittled down to take the bad spots out, or used in another way, like maybe cooking instead of fresh, to be able to still use these products. This is how we lived off of them for 7.5 years. We would bring home the potatoes and cut out the eyes and have potatoes. We would bring home the bananas and make banana bread or freeze them. And we would bring home things like that and feed them to our barnyard animals because they loved them. It got to the point when we pulled in the yard, our goat was waiting, wanting to know what treat we had brought him today. And because of this, I learned even more so how to make something out of nothing. I would take the items that I was given and I would figure out how to make a good meal or a good several meals or several desserts out of what I was given. And we tried to make sure that even though things couldn't be sold at the store, that they didn't get wasted after we had to bring them home. And of course, one of the main things that was even drilled more so was to make a list. People that came in without a list always ended up buying more than they intended to buy. Always ended up buying things that maybe were more expensive than they intended to buy because they looked good or they were hungry for that item and they didn't know what they were going to make for supper. So having a plan on what you're going to do, not only what you're going to make or what you have at home to make, but having a list of the things that you really do need when you go in the store can save you money. And above all, as I said before, know your prices. I knew when I checked someone out what the item cost and what we paid for it. I became a master of knowing what the going rate of things cost. And I would keep tabs on our competitors to see what they were charging so that we could be competitive with them so that our community didn't have to drive. It's so important to know those prices. Nothing is more frustrating than to pick something up and then go somewhere else a few weeks later and see that you could have saved a lot of money by buying it somewhere else just because you did not know what it was really worth or what it was really selling for. And the one thing that I know that we have changed since we closed the store, because we became spoiled. We would bring home ice. We sold a ton of ice and we would bring home ice. And once the store closed, I realized I didn't want to pay for ice. That was silly to pay for ice. Not to mention those huge bags of ice take up so much room in your deep freeze. So I pulled out my old ice trays and we began making our own ice. And we have been making our own ice since then. If we go camping, we freeze up water and we take that, or we take those blue frozen ice packs and we take those with us and we use our little mini fridge in our camper. I just have a really hard time paying for ice now. So I hope that these were insightful. Maybe you can even see yourself or someone you know in some of these scenarios, but I feel like it benefited me in so many ways to learn how to be even more frugal by owning my own business. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.